Today we're going to cover section 1.7, division of real numbers. Remember, division is just the opposite of multiplication. So here is a basic rule. Anytime you see A divided by B, that's the same thing as A over B, which is the same thing as A times 1 over B. So once again, sometimes these letters doesn't fully explain it, so let's just use some numbers. 6 divided by 3 is the same thing over 6 over 3, which is the same thing as 6 times 1 over 3. Of course, all of that would be equal to 2. So that just gives you a good kind of rundown of the basic rules. Just like with the multiplication, the signs are done the same way. So a positive divided by a positive will always equal a positive. A negative divided by a positive will always equal a negative. A negative divided by a negative will always equal a positive. And a positive divided by a negative will always equal a negative. Once again, notice that the ones that match, if the signs match, just like with multiplication, then your answer is always going to be positive. If they do not match, negative and a positive, then your answer is always going to be a negative. Nothing in between. Now, when we start with our fractions, and that's kind of what we're going to get into now, remember, when you divide fractions, you really multiply fractions. And yes, technically you are dividing them, but it's so much easier when we just use the reciprocal. So anyway, if I say 6 is divided by 1/2, a lot of times people won't just say that, yeah, that's half of 6, which is 3. But remember, we got to follow the process. So anyway, first thing we want to do is flip and multiply. So anytime you have a fraction, you should remember these two. Flip and multiply. I'll just say FM, similar to a radio. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn these both into a fraction. All right, that's the first thing I'm going to do. Now, what I have to do is I have to flip what I'm dividing by. So that's where the reciprocal comes into play once again. Remember, the reciprocal is just turning that fraction upside down. So the reciprocal of 1/2 is going to become 2 over 1. And remember, flip, and then the second thing you do is you multiply. So I'm just turning that division into a multiplication. So I'm going to multiply straight across. 6 times 2 is 12. 1 times 1 is 1. And remember, either one of these answers is correct, but they both equal 12. So remember, if I'm dividing 6 into half, think about if you had 6 pizzas, I cut them all in half, I would have 12 1/2 of pizzas. Now, if I use another one, for an example, 2/3 divided by 4/7. Well, a lot of times we can just do normal division, but in this case, this is where it really comes into play once again. Remember, I have to flip this one, so I'm turning that into 7/4, then I have, or 7/4, then I have to multiply, so I'm just switching this to a multiplication. And remember, the first one, this 2/3, stays the same. Then I'm just multiplying straight across. So if I multiply straight across, 2 times 7 is 14. 3 times 4 is 12. And I get 14 over 12. Yes, I can reduce that down if I want, but I don't really need to break that down anymore. I can break it down to 7 over 6, but remember, for this first chapter, I just want you to get the answer, right? We'll go over reducing fractions a little bit later on. And I guess we'll kind of get into that now. But as far as for the first chapter, we're just going to kind of save that for later on when we get into the second chapter. So if I'm reducing, my fractions, I have to look at it, and I'm just going to use an example here. The only time that you'll really reduce these fractions is if it's written as a problem. So in other words, -3 times 8, and all of that is going to be divided by 6. Technically, this is a fraction. But when we work this out, we're still going to follow PEMDAS. We're going to work left to right. So this is going to become -3 times 8. And remember, a negative times a positive is going to give me a negative. So 3 times 8 is 24. And anytime you see a slash that's telling you to divide, generally I will put the actual division notation, which looks this way. So anyway, that is giving you negative 24 divided by 6. Once again, a negative, and this is a positive. So I know my answer is going to be negative. 24 is divided by 6 4 times. Now, one question that you're going to see on your upcoming test is it's going to say that a dozen of something. Just as a reminder, a dozen is equal to 12. So if I buy a dozen eggs, and my dozen eggs cost me $1.80, and it wants to know how much is each egg. Well, for starters, anytime it says how much and then you have an each, almost every time it's telling you to divide. So then I got to figure, what do I need to divide? Well, my price, if that's what it's asking you, how much is talking about the money, then whatever the money is going to go into your dividing box. Let me give myself a little bit more room so I can write on the top. So that's going to be 180. And then what I'm dividing with, which is my eggs, is going to be 12. Now, because I have a decimal located here, the decimal basically just falls straight up at the top. If you don't have a decimal, then you don't have to worry about it. 12 won't go into 1 evenly, but 12 will go into 18. 12 will go into 18 one time. 1 times 12 will give me 12. 18 minus 12 is going to give me a 6. Then remember, the 0 just drops down. 12 will divide into 60 5 times. And that means that each egg is worth 15 cents. All of these are correct answers, and I would take 15, 15 cents, or even 0.5 with a dollar sign in front of it. All of those. I just want you to get the math correct. Right? We'll worry about the cents and the dollars and all that kind of stuff later. Now, when I have expressions with exponents, and this is the last part of this section, so for my expressions, and these are with exponents, if I have a negative 2 and I raise that to the third power, remember, this is my base, negative 2, so basically I'm multiplying negative 2 3 times. And I'm just going to put it in parentheses because it's easier than to write out all the multiplication. Plus my negatives will kind of make a mess of it when I see my multiplication signs. But anyway, once again, go back to our old rule. How many negatives do we have? We have 3, so automatically we know our answer is going to be a negative. Then 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. So this is going to be our final answer, negative 8. Now, sometimes the only time that it will differ is if I have negative 2 to the fourth power. Now, none of these powers make a difference right now, but if it is in parentheses, then you put these in parentheses. Because this is not in parentheses, the parentheses is implied to be here. So automatically you work out everything in the parentheses first, so you know that this answer is going to be negative. 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 is going to give me 16. So this answer is going to be negative 16. Now, if I had negative 2 to the fourth power, well, let me go back. Negative 2 to the third power, same thing's going to apply. It's still going to be negative 8. So it's always going to be negative if there's no parentheses. If there is parentheses, it could be even or it could be odd. Because if I had negative 2, and I rose that to the fourth power, and remember, I would be multiplying each thing, and it's only because this is in parentheses, each one, negative 2. These are an even number, 1, 2, 3, 4 of the negative signs, so therefore my answer has got to be positive. And this is going to be a positive 16. Notice the difference. This is a negative only because the parentheses is here, or it does not have a parentheses. It can look like this. But if you see the parentheses, you have to work out whatever's in the parentheses first. Just like following PEMDAS. There's no parentheses here, so really I'm skipping that, and then I'm going straight to my exponents. Then I work my exponents out first. Here I'm doing my exponents first. And the last part on this section is this 5 over 0 is undefined. You will never come up with an answer in this class in which the denominator is a 0. However, if I have 0 over 5, then that answer would be 0. Now the difference between those is this is basically saying if I had no money, which is $0, and I divide it between 5 people, each person gets nothing. So that's understandable and that's logical and that can happen. However, if I have $5 and I split that amongst 0 people, there's no one there to divide it. Therefore, it's undefined. We have those type of questions that work out in math, but we will not cover those in this class. So if you come across one at the bottom, you know that something, you probably have them reversed.